From an early age, we learn that the book of Genesis is the absolute beginning of the story of creation. But what if I told you that there is an even older text? A book that described the formation of the universe long before Moses wrote a single word. A forgotten manuscript buried in the sands of time that may contain details of creation that have never come down to us. If this is true, why was it erased from history? And more importantly, what was it about it that so frightened religious authorities over the centuries? The questions are inevitable. Is the Bible the first written revelation about creation? Or was there an earlier, suppressed account hidden from human eyes? And why would such an important text be left out of the Holy Scriptures? Researchers, theologians, and historians have pored over fragments, inscriptions, and accounts of ancient civilizations for centuries trying to find the answer. What they have discovered is disturbing. In the deserts of Mesopotamia, among clay tablets and broken parchments, the first clues emerge. Texts such as the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian creation hymn, and other fragments of Babylonian and Akkadian origin contain descriptions that are surprisingly similar to what we know from Genesis. But with one disturbing detail: they were written long before Moses. Could these be distorted versions of the true creation? Or are we looking at an echo of an older book that disappeared before the biblical story took shape? Some scholars go even further and point to the existence of an ancient manuscript, which would have been consulted by the biblical writers themselves, but which was never included in the scriptures for reasons that remain a mystery. This book, according to theorists and archaeologists, detailed the stages of creation with a wealth of symbolism, names of cosmic entities, and spiritual events that could shake the faith of many. And this possibility raises a new question. Are we ready to discover what was really said before Genesis? What intrigues researchers most is the similarity in language and structure between Genesis and these ancient texts. Terms such as the abyss, the separation of the waters, and even the very idea of an orderly beginning after a primordial chaos appear in both the Bible and these earlier accounts. But what almost no one knows is that in some versions of these texts, there is mention of an original source of knowledge, a book of primordial creation, copies of which were said to have been destroyed or hidden by priests of ancient civilizations. There are records that this supposed book circulated secretly among Hebrew scribes during the Babylonian exile. Some scholars claim that parts of it may have inspired the early chapters of Genesis, but were carefully rewritten to align with Israel's monotheistic theology. Fragments of apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Jubilees and even the Book of Enoch, carry echoes of this older narrative, as if they were pieces of a larger puzzle, a story that was dismantled, re-edited, and ultimately silenced. But why? What was the explosive content that needed to be erased? One of the most daring theories claims that this book contained details about the first spiritual beings created, entities that were never mentioned in Genesis, but who played fundamental roles in the formation of the heavens and the earth. Were they the sons of God who appear later in Scripture? Or perhaps even older entities, purposely forgotten, to avoid theological confusion? The answer may lie in a recent discovery at an archaeological site near Nineveh. Among the ruins of Sumerian temples, archaeologists have found fragments of a text that, when translated, described a creation process with 7 stages, each overseen by a different celestial being. The text referred to a book of the first words, something that, according to the inscription itself, was sealed by the elders to protect the minds of common men. Could this be the book that came before Genesis? This concept of a book of first words opens the door to a range of theological and spiritual interpretations. Some scholars believe that the contents of this book could reveal the true order of God's first creative acts, including details about spiritual dimensions that were formed before matter even existed. Others suggest that this manuscript dealt with a cosmic battle that predated creation, a war between spiritual forces that fought for the right to shape reality. The fact is, if such a book existed, its contents would have been so impactful that only the most ancient spiritual leaders had access to it. There are also records within rabbinic traditions that speak of a lost text known as the Sefer HaReshit, or the Book of the Beginning, which is said to have been transmitted orally before any formal writing of the Torah. Some Kabbalists believe that fragments of this knowledge survived only in codes, hidden between the lines of the Hebrew Bible itself. They claim that by deciphering certain sequences of letters and numbers in Genesis, it would be possible to glimpse part of this original revelation. But the most controversial theory of all suggests that this pre-Genesis book was not only hidden, it was actively forbidden by God. This is because it would contain truths that humanity, in its current state, is not yet ready to understand. A truth that would involve not only the creation of the earth, but also the birth of concepts, such as time, free will, and evil itself. This would explain why there is so much silence, so much loss of records, and so much mystery surrounding the real origins of the universe. Interestingly, in recent excavations in the ancient city of Ugarit, researchers have found tablets that describe a succession of creative commands in which a heavenly voice gives orders to separate light from darkness, water from the firmament, and create the foundations of the earth. The similarity to Genesis is striking, but with one detail. These texts are millennia older. The question that remains is, are these documents just cultural coincidences, or are they distant echoes of the book that described creation long before Genesis was written? Many scholars who argue for the existence of this lost book point to a curious pattern. In various ancient cultures, there is always reference to a primordial record, a book of origins that was lost over time. From Sumerian texts to ancient Egyptian and Proto-Hebrew manuscripts, references to an earlier source of knowledge appear frequently. It is as if different civilizations have tried in different ways to preserve an echo of that original truth that has disappeared. Among the most cited texts in this discussion is the aforementioned Enuma Elish, also called the Babylonian Epic of Creation. Despite its mythological and polytheistic structure, there are elements in it that are almost disconcertingly reminiscent of Genesis: the initial chaos, the separation of the waters, the emergence of light and solid ground. But what is most striking is that the Enuma Elish mentions an even older scroll, called the Tablets of Destiny, which would contain the original decrees of the cosmos, a document that would have been kept by the gods and never shared with humanity. Within Jewish tradition, another clue comes from the Midrashim, which are ancient rabbinical commentaries and interpretations of Scripture. Some of these texts suggest that Moses had access to secret writings during his stay in Egypt, texts that date back to the time of Noah and even Adam. One of these Midrashim states that much has been revealed and much has been veiled so that men's minds might not stumble over the things that are eternal. Could this be a direct allusion to the content of this pre-Genesis book? And if you think this is all just theory without archaeological foundation, it is important to remember that in recent years, discoveries such as the Dead Sea Scrolls have shown the world that texts thought lost for millennia can in fact resurface. Who is to say that buried in some forgotten cave or in the foundations of an ancient city, this book of original creation is not just waiting to be found? Most disturbingly, some descriptions of this lost book suggest that it contained detailed explanations of the mechanisms of creation, how matter was organized, how time began to flow, and how the first spiritual beings were assigned specific tasks in the universe. It was not just a poetic narrative, but a quasi-technical record with information that, if discovered today, could shock both science and faith. There are even contemporary theologians who speculate that the contents of this book could answer questions that have tormented humanity for millennia. What existed before creation? How did evil arise? What lies beyond the visible heavens? These questions, which are often treated as unfathomable mysteries, may once have had an answer, but they were locked away by human hands, and who knows, even by divine will. There are also those who believe that this book was not only erased from history, but that its fragments were diluted throughout several other texts that we now know as apocryphal, Gnostic, or even heretical. Texts such as the Book of Lamentations of Adam and Eve, the Sibylline Oracles, and even parts of the Book of Enoch contain elements that seem unconnected, but that, when analyzed together, draw the outline of a much larger and much older narrative. Most impressively, recent discoveries at universities specializing in ancient texts suggest that some of this content may have been encoded in the first lines of Genesis, hidden in numerical patterns, sequences of letters, or poetic structures that we are only now beginning to decipher. If these theories are true, it means that the book of original creation never completely disappeared. It was always there, invisible to the naked eye, but waiting for those who had the courage to look beyond the obvious. In the midst of these investigations, a group of Jewish scholars known as the Masters of Ancient Kabbalah developed an even more intriguing theory. They claim that the true content of this original book was preserved not on papyrus or parchment, but in the very names of the Hebrew letters and their hidden meanings. Each letter, each stroke, each numerical value is a coded fragment of the primordial creation narrative. According to them, anyone who can correctly interpret the Hebrew alphabet in light of these ancient secrets will be able to reconstruct what was lost. This idea gains strength when we observe that in the book of Genesis itself, the first verses are loaded with symbols, repetitions, and constructions that deviate from the common logic of a historical narrative. It is as if the text were hiding a second layer of meaning, accessible only to those who knew how to decipher it. And many Kabbalists claim that this second layer would be precisely the distorted reflection of that original book of creation, what is left of it diluted within the structure of Genesis that we know today. In addition to the Jewish tradition, Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, also support the theory of the existence of an earlier book. One of the documents found, called the Hypostasis of the Archons, presents a sequence of creation events that differs completely from the Genesis version, but which, curiously, begins with the mention of a forbidden source of knowledge written by spiritual beings before the formation of the earth. This raises a new suspicion. How many versions of creation existed before arriving at the narrative we have today? And this question leads us to an even deeper question. If there really was a book that described creation before Genesis, and if it was hidden or destroyed, then who made that decision? Was it an act of divine protection to prevent man from accessing secrets for which he was not yet ready? Or was it a human choice, motivated by interests of power, doctrine, and spiritual control? In one way or another, the shadow of that book continues to loom over our history. In some schools of early Christian thought, there is a belief that the Apostle John, when writing the gospel that bears his name, had glimpses of this previous knowledge. This would explain why he begins his text with the enigmatic phrase, "In the beginning was the Word." Instead of describing the creation of the physical world as Genesis does, John seems to delve directly into a spiritual and eternal concept. Many scholars suggest that this choice was intentional, an attempt to preserve a part of the revelation that was already disappearing from the official tradition. Another important clue comes from Ethiopian texts, especially ancient versions of the Book of Enoch, which contain descriptions of creative processes, celestial hierarchies, and dialogues between spiritual beings that were never included in the canonical Bible. There is even a section that speaks of a book of ancient orders, a collection of decrees made before the creation of the earth. The exact contents of this book remain unknown, but its mention in such ancient texts raises an urgent question. Why do so many records from different times and cultures point to the existence of a pre-Genesis book? It is in this context that the boldest theory of all emerges, that Genesis itself would be a simplified version, a kind of theological summary, carefully adapted to be understood by a humanity that is still spiritually immature. According to this view, the Lost Book contained much deeper and even dangerous details, such as the description of fallen entities, parallel dimensions, and spiritual laws that govern not only our physical world, but all invisible realities. As archaeologists continue to dig through deserts and mountains in search of new manuscripts, and as theologians scour ancient libraries for clues, the question remains: what if this book is closer than we think? What if, somehow, God is waiting for the right moment for this truth to come to light? A moment when humanity is finally ready to face what has been hidden for millennia. Recently, universities around the world have begun advanced digital analysis projects on ancient biblical texts, using artificial intelligence to identify hidden patterns, numerical codes, and possible hidden layers of meaning. Surprisingly, early results indicate that certain passages of Genesis contain sequences of letters and repetitions that are not attributed to chance. For some scholars, this reinforces the theory that some of the content of the original Book of Creation may have been intentionally camouflaged within the text we have today. Meanwhile, biblical conspiracy theorists point to the Council of Nicaea, which took place in the 4th century, as one of the pivotal moments when books deemed dangerous were officially discarded from the compilation of Scripture. While Genesis was not directly altered, many believe that at that time some documents with deeper revelations about creation were deliberately buried, both literally and metaphorically. The justification? To protect the unity of doctrine and avoid cosmic heresies that could confuse the faithful. Other scholars, less conspiracy theorists but equally intrigued, suggest that God himself has purposefully allowed this silence, that he, in his sovereignty, decided that certain details of creation would only be revealed in future times, when humanity was more spiritually mature to understand the complexity of everything that occurred before our world existed. This line of thinking reinforces the idea that the original Book of Creation may, in fact, resurface, but only in due time. What we can say for sure is that evidence about this lost book is piling up from different sources, cultures, and time periods. And when so many pieces from so many different places start to point in the same direction, it's hard to ignore the call of doubt. Are we just scratching the surface of the true story of creation? Could what we've learned so far be just the abridged version, while the full script still remains hidden? Among the most daring scholars, there is even the hypothesis that part of this lost book may be outside of Earth, stored in some spiritual or even physical place inaccessible to man. Some apocryphal texts mention celestial rooms where sacred records were sealed, protected by angels who have the specific mission of preventing unworthy humans from accessing this knowledge before the appointed time. This raises another disturbing question. What if a select few already had access to this content, but were never able to reveal what they saw? Several Jewish traditions speak of men such as Enoch, Moses, and even Daniel as figures who were given visions of layers of creation that we will never see in this life. Ancient accounts say that Enoch was taken to heavenly realms where he was shown the archives of creation with details that no other human being has ever seen. Some of these experiences may have been fragments of the original book of creation, transmitted in encrypted form in the texts that have come down to us. Christian theology, in turn, brings an even more intriguing element. The book of Revelation describes a book sealed with 7 seals, which only the Lamb is worthy to open. Many wonder, could this be the book of original creation itself, a document kept until the end of time, when it will finally be revealed to the entire world? If this is true, it means that the answers to all these questions will only come at the time of the final judgment, when the mysteries surrounding the beginning of everything are finally unveiled. As we wait for that day, humanity continues its search. Each archaeological discovery, each translated fragment, each deciphered ancient text brings us a little closer to this hidden truth. Curiosity remains alive, pulsing in the minds of theologians, archaeologists, and believers from all parts of the world, because deep down, we all know that there is something beyond, a bigger, deeper, and more impactful story that has not yet been fully told to us. And if this truth burns in your heart, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. And now we have a members area. By becoming a member, you bless this work and help us to continue producing edifying and revealing content like this. Just click on the Become a Member button below, next to the Subscribe button. Be a part of this. Perhaps the greatest lesson behind this search for the book of original creation is precisely this. Understanding creation is an ongoing journey. It does not end with a chapter in Genesis, nor with an ancient scroll hidden away. With each generation, God reveals a little more, and perhaps over the centuries, He has purposefully allowed these fragments to be scattered so that humanity would never lose its desire to seek the truth. The mystery remains. Where is this book? Does it still physically exist? Is it hidden in the sands of some desert, in the vaults of ancient institutions? Or has it been removed from our reach altogether, stored in the heavens until the day of final revelation? Whatever the answer, the fact is that the evidence points to the existence of an account older, more detailed, and perhaps more dangerous than the one we know today. And the big question for you who have followed me so far is, if this book were found tomorrow, would you have the courage to read it? Would you be prepared to face truths that could transform everything you believe about creation, about God, and about your own purpose? History may have been silenced for millennia, but the search continues because the truth always finds a way.